Welcome to the Yale Center for British Arts online series, At Home, Artists in Conversation. I'm Valerie Steele, Director of the Museum at FIT, and I'm delighted to welcome Duro Olowu to our program today. Before we get started, I have a few housekeeping notes. Please note that this program will be recorded. Your camera and sound are muted and will remain so throughout the program. We'll be using the Q&A feature located on your navigation bar, so gather your questions for Duro, and they'll be answered at the end of the program. But please feel free to submit your questions at any time during the program. Yale University acknowledges that Indigenous peoples and nations, including the Mohegan, Mashantucket Pequot, Eastern Pequot, Chagachok, Golden Hill, Pawgasset, Niantic, and the Quinnipiac, and other Algonquin-speaking peoples have stewarded through generations the lands and waterways of what is now the state of Connecticut. We honor and respect their enduring relationship that exists between these peoples and nations and this land. Now, Duro Olowu is a Nigerian-born British fashion designer and curator who lives and works in London and New York. Launched in 2004, his eponymous Womenswear label is known for its innovative combinations of colors and patterns, harmonious juxtapositions of vintage textiles with custom fabrics, and impeccably tailored silhouettes. Olowu's aesthetic vision is informed by his multicultural and international background, art, and other creative practices. An instant sensation, his first collection comprised one empire waist design, the now signature Duro dress, which was lauded as the dress of the year in 2005 by both American and British Vogue. That same year, Olowu was honored as the new designer of the year at the British Fashion Awards, the only designer to have received this accolade before their first runway show. In 2009, he was named the best international designer at the African Fashion Awards and was one of 6 designers nominated for the Swiss Textile Federation Award. First Lady Michelle Obama, who frequently wore his label while in office, commissioned him in 2015 to decorate the Vermeil Room at the White House for the holiday season. More recently, Olowu has curated the following critically acclaimed contemporary art exhibitions: Making and Unmaking at the Camden Art Center in London, 2016, and Duro Olowu, Seeing Chicago, at the Museum of Contemporary Art, Chicago, in 2020, for which he selected 380 works of art from public and private art collections around the city. His designs are featured in many collections worldwide, including the Rhode Island School of Design Museum and the museum at the Fashion Institute of Technology in New York City. It's so nice to see you, Duro.
Thank you, Valerie. I'm thrilled.
I know you're in Greece now, which seems even further away than London, but I'm envying you being there.
Well, it's work. I've been commissioned to make some work for an exhibition at the Young Foundation.
I thought I'd start first by asking you about your family and youth, about how you came to be who you are.
I'll be brief. I was born in Lagos, Nigeria. My mother Jamaican, father Nigerian, and they met in England in the 50s and then moved back to Nigeria. They were both studying, moved back to Nigeria in the late 50s. And then, I grew up in Lagos, which is where I spent most of my childhood, in a very sort of cosmopolitan sort of environment. I mean, of course, blending of my Nigerian Yoruba culture and the fact that I had a Jamaican mother, so we spent summers in England and in Europe visiting family and friends, mostly my mother's brothers and their wives and my cousins. So it was this very sort of transcontinental, eye-opening experience. And I really feel a lot of who I am and a lot of the way I view the world came from that. I also, when I was 16, I came to school in England and then to law school. And then, later returned to Nigeria and worked for a few years before moving back to London. Spent a few years living in Paris, etc. But, I feel that my childhood was special in the sense that I was able to experience things that a lot of people experience but somehow take for granted. And from a very young age, I felt the need never to take anything for
Fabulous. How did you get into fashion?
granted. I feel that my real interest was very, very, very early. I mean, I know it sounds strange, but I do recall very sort of vivid moments as a child of just noticing clothing in a way that perhaps was not typical in certain ways, but every child has the thing that they come into the world first and recognize will always be part of their world. And I feel that the textures of fabric, probably from the people that carried me as a child, and also the cacophony of color and the mix of color that entered rooms and left rooms, always sort of stayed with me. So even when drawing or playing with Rubik cube type toys, etc., I didn't realize it, but my parents always said that if people were making one thing, I'd make another kind of thing. But I do remember a very, very, very vivid sense of style. Again, part of how I grew up with my parents. And also style that meant something, style that was more about how one saw themselves in the world and how the respect for making things. That was the first thing I spotted. Anyway, so I didn't really start until quite late because Nigeria, as wonderful as my parents were, they only studied professions. And in those days, we're talking about the early 80s, fashion wasn't necessarily one of them. So, I decided, okay, I'll train as a lawyer and do all that. And then I can go off and do what I want. And I came into it quite late because I started a label, a small store in about 2019, which went on till called Olowu Golding, and that went on till my partner then and I separated, and I launched with a new collection in 2004, which was the one with the dress that
Let's go back to that last picture so we can see the 2004 dress. Thank you. The famous Duro dress.
Yes. And really it was, one doesn't envisage the impact when one is making something. And I think that's a very healthy way. But what I realized was that I really wanted to do a silhouette that would suit a lot of women and a silhouette that was sensual but respectful and somehow had this sort of multifaceted fusion of multicultural elements. And I felt really that the sleeves were the liberating factor in this dress. I felt that the kind of empire waist paired with those sleeves really hopefully gave women and the wearers the freedom to express themselves in ways that were very confident without seeming overwrought or vulgar. So that was a great thing. And then from there, it just sort of went crazy. Barnes bought it, Sally Singer, American Vogue did this big article, and it just really went a bit mad, but mad in a good way.
Let's look at the next picture. And you can start maybe telling us a little bit about what inspires your collections. We're looking now at a few from 2007, 2008.
Yeah. Well, a lot of the time, there are elements of art in the collection. My early collections were really inspired by places. 2007, which was my first one-way collection, was inspired by Bamako in Mali because I had never been, but I was always inspired by the architecture and the gracefulness of the women and the sort of forward and modern nature of the history of Mali and Bamako in particular. So I tried to translate that into this sort of chic, very wearable, complicated in the right way collection of clothing, and that was in 2007. And as I moved on, the collections became infused with elements of film and art, like the one up at the moment, 2008. So the collections always have an element of creativity from another source in it, because I always say that people say, who's your muse? And honestly, I never think of a muse. I mean, you find inspiration in every woman, you find inspiration in every culture, you find inspiration in different mediums of creativity, art, film, music, but inherent in all of my inspirations is the nature of my aesthetic, which is based on where I'm from and my cultural heritage, and also my life experience. On the left, there was a collection from 2011, which was my first New York City show, my first show when I had in New York City. And that was inspired by the muse of an artist from the 20s, but also by the Harlem Renaissance, you know? So again, it's that melange of ideas, eras, faces. Her name was Renee Pearl, by the way, the lady that was inspired, and she was the muse of Jacques-Henri Darty. So to mix that with the incredible styles of Harlem fashion shows in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and all the incredible art and writing that was going on involving great artists and writers like Langston Hughes and the photographs of all these Bandersy, I wanted to make it modern and fresh and wearable, but in a special way. So yes, I'm always inspired by the now. I'm inspired by the politics of the past and the present, and very much of the
Well, the idea of the modernity is very important. And I want to go to the next image and the next few. As we go through some of these images of some of your favorite collections, you can briefly just tell us a little bit about them, maybe something that happened in conjunction with the actual fashion show. Where are you holding these shows, for example? This one, 2009.
2009, yes, and this was rather special. I loved the atmosphere that was created because I did it in these huge, long corridor rooms at the Royal Academy of Arts in London. These beautiful rooms that were hardly seen, and there were 2 or 3 rooms, and at different times the model would appear in another room. And what was really nice about this was it felt really like a set. I always worked with an incredible team of people I respected, like Johnny Sapong always did the hair for me, and the lighting person was the same. The person I had doing the music was always the same for collections. So we had a real rapport. And even when I wasn't working as a designer, I looked at obviously, I saw the shows of great designers I admired from the 30s to the 70s, 80s. And I understood and felt that there had to be a strong collaboration with all the creative people involved in their practice. And that this was actually very comforting. Even though I would leave my mark on it, it was nice to share it with someone. This collection was inspired by Federico Fellini's films. So the soundtrack had that, but it also had Fela Kuti in it. And it was also inspired by the Brazilian film the Carnival film, Michel Carnival, will come back to me. The one set in Brazil in the 50s.
Brilliant.
Lovers, yeah.
Let's look at the next one here. These are gorgeous. These prints are amazing.
Thank you. Actually, these were the ones where I sort of went almost full hog, coming away from with textiles. So it was inspired by a great portrait, self-portrait by Ivan Schuler, self-portrait in the peacock, and he's wearing this waistcoat. And even though he was a man, and it's a very sort of masculine-looking portrait, it was so devoid of any presupposed limitations, about style and dress. And it was flamboyant in the best possible way. Flamboyant, but not heavy. So apart from the fabrics I designed from this collection, I also dug into my stash of vintage couture fabrics by Abraham of Switzerland and Gandini and people like that. So infused in all of this was some of those fabrics, and the cape on the left, which I think also paid homage to the whole period of Wiener Werkstatt and Hoffman and Log. I think it was really, that's hand cut lace. I think it was a real sort of attempt to show the wearability of really beautifully made things, as opposed to keeping them on special occasions.
Yeah, that early modernism, which was so modern and so liberated.
Yeah.
Let's look at the next one now.
The collection on the left was inspired by Birds of Paradise. Sometimes I don't normally start thinking about a collection with a specific theme because you're always thinking about new silhouettes. And based on the previous collection, I sort of became not obsessed, but very intrigued and very determined about making capes wearable with a certain lightness, like almost like a simple safari jacket or a simple jacket. And that became my obsession. This cape in particular was to express that bird of paradise thing, these birds that have 100 different varieties sometimes on each one. And you cannot place, you cannot capture them, they're faster than the wind. They're very easy to recognize because their feathers can change or they can change position. That's an embroidered cape that seemed heavy, which I juxtaposed with different embroideries, but was as light as a feather, and you didn't need to take off. You could just undo the buttons and it fell open. It was almost like wearing a trench coat on your shoulders.
Fabulous.
And there's a bit of the 70s pant. Like I love a beautifully tailored high-waisted, slight flared trouser that hits the side of the shoe just in the right way. But I also like the masculine feminine. So I put in the tuxedo trouser stripe on the side of that, but in a print. The collection opposite Spring Summer 2014 was more about, this was the time I felt things were happening politically that were unsettling in the world, both here and in America. It was very careful, and I felt that also it was a time when a lot of the way women and young women were being told to look at themselves was rather not just patronizing, but it made them seem a bit vulnerable. So this was about sort of urban warriors, who wear what they want, how they want, but are not to be messed with. And that doesn't mean that they're not passionate and emotional and sympathetic women. And that again is devoid of age. I just wanted to make them feel almost like superwomen, but in the best possible way.
Yeah. Well, we're already about halfway through. So I'm going to go a little bit more quickly through the next few images from the collection. So just shout out if there's something important.
Okay, so a lot of people think I don't do monoprint. I do a lot of monoprint. The collection this fall was inspired by Amrita Sheffield, a wonderful artist from the 30s. She died very young, amazing, and that was very inspiring. We can go to the next. Oh, this was a favorite. This was inspired by the Pointer Sisters album. You can work it out. Yeah, from the 70s, but also juxtaposed with the island of Saint Louis, which I had visited in Senegal, which is one of my favorite places in the world. It's called the Venice of Africa. It's amazing. And also the 30s movies of Kurosawa, which were really like film noir. Yeah. And the model was this incredible model, Kine Diop. She was from Senegal, she was based in Paris, very successful in Paris, but she imbued the whole collection with a certain elegance and hauteur that was amazing to me. So the juxtaposition of prints came off hopefully as not too overwhelming.
Wonderful. Let's go to the next one.
This, I beg your pardon, I made a mistake with the previous one. This was the Amrita Sheffield collection, inspired by that artist. And again, spring 16, summer 2016. She died very young and she was half Hungarian, so she infused her Indian attire and beautiful saris with Hungarian embroidered roots. And I wanted to translate that. Also, she did not conform, and I wanted to do a collection of non-conformism, but in a
very important. Next one.
The Queen Nina Simone. This was called Stylish Activist. And it was very important to me to do a collection that I was always inspired by the great activists of our time, from, whether they were Nina Simone, Nelson Mandela, Angela, gosh, I'm lost for words, but I think people know who I'm talking about. And Nina Simone, I felt, was terribly misunderstood towards the end of her career, but was at a certain point, such a style inspiration to me. I listened to her at home as a child in my parents' home. but the album covers and the style she had on the album covers with this elegance that still came out with the most poignant, powerful political words and words of visionary words to inspire people to fight for their rights, made me want to do a collection called The Stylish Activist, which I think she embodied.
Nina Simone was such a revolutionary style icon, a revolutionary woman.
Absolutely. And she loved clothes, you can tell, but not as ornamental garments. Clothes to help her put a message, of course.
Yeah. We get the next one.
Okay, Lee Miller, surrealist artist, in my opinion, very underrated, known more then and perhaps now as a muse to Man Ray and friend of Picasso, etc., but a great artist herself, a great style icon, an incredible photographer, and this fusion of masculine, feminine tailoring, practicality, mixed with chic, sharp dressing, Lee Miller.
Yes, I love your mixture of tailoring and fluid dressmaking.
Thank you.
We get the next one.
This was great because in the late 70s, when I would come on holiday to London to visit my cousins, there were certain bands that were huge. Of course, we listened to a lot of reggae, Steel Pulse and Gregory Isaacs, the Wailers, of course. But there was a ska band, and the lead singer was Pauline Black, and I felt it was called again, I'm drawing a blank. But Pauline Black was a great inspiration because she mixed this ska style. Ska is a certain kind of reggae that's a faster beat. And she mixed that style with this incredible Selector. That was the name of the band, the Selector. And I was lucky enough to meet her after I did the collection, and it really made my day.
The influence of music on fashion is just incalculable.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Let's go to the next one.
Now this, Claude Van Vechten, the photographer, famous for photographing during the Harlem Renaissance, all the creative people of color, and also people like Dali, who were in New York at that time, from the 30s right up until the 50s, Ruby Dee, dancers, writers, choreographers, Alvin Ailey, you name it, he photographed all of them, and always with a fabric backdrop that actually added to their luminescence. And I wanted to do that to show the clothes against this backdrop, which was fabric in the back. The curtains were done by Natalie Farmer for me. And I really wanted to do that to show that you can wear things that are really juxtaposition of prints and not even blend in to the background if you wear them with confidence and if you mix them in a way that imbues that confidence. I was really thrilled also to do a collection that I felt sort of was an homage to furnishing textiles. So the prints I designed, the floral prints, the stripe prints, was a real homage to the love I have for great furnishing textiles by some of the greatest designers over the last 60, 70
That's years. True. Fashion people tend to forget about furnishing fabrics, which can be so creative. So many artists have worked on those.
And people like Adrian was famous, for bringing this and even Claire McCardle. So I loved doing this collection.
Let's get the next one.
I mean, Mira Makeba, there were so many Makeba LPs in my home at home when I was growing up, mixed with Minnie Riperton, Ella Fitzgerald, Nat King Cole, Fela Kuti, and she was the ultimate for me and a real beacon of, I call it a sort of chic Afrique, incredible presence, but such an inspiring political activist with God-given talent, and her style was just incredible. And this wholeheartedly, this collection for fall winter, using knitwear like the coat to the far left, printed silks and velvets, and also chiffons. This was my Makeba homage.
Well, the tactile qualities in your fashion are so striking as well. And we think first of visual qualities because of the color and patterns, but in fact, you can see through your use of fabric and your love of fabric, the way the tactility of that velvet, for example, shows something special.
Thank you.
Haptic touch.
Thank you. And I always feel that, like the knitwear, I started knitwear about 3 or 4 seasons before this because Growing up, knitwear was cut like clothing, and I wanted to do that. So that's how I work with it. And I always feel the clothes need to feel good on the inside and on the outside. So a lot of the tailored pieces, etc., are lined in silk. And the chiffon dress and cape is double lined. The dress actually has 3 layers of the same short chiffon on the outside as the lining.
Let's get the next one. I love that idea of the lining with silk. That's thinking of the wearer, not just the viewer.
Absolutely, always. This, again, inspired by a woman whose career and attitude, not just the fact that she was the only one who actually left Picasso as opposed to Picasso leaving. And I'm a fan, I love Picasso's work. This is Françoise Gilles. Françoise Gilles, a great artist, still alive, I think she's 98 or something. She, very stylish, but very focused on her work and just a good representation of a working female artist. I came across a book based on the diaries she made while traveling with her husband through India, Senegal, and Venice in the 60s and 70s. And that inspired this collection because she didn't take photographs, she did sketches in her book.
Marvelous. Next.
I keep saying to everything, but this is special because it's totally inspired by the great Emma Amos, who, and an African American artist who many people may not have heard about, but who many people will soon. An incredible artist, printmaker, teacher, lecturer, again, undervalued and underrated in her time, as a lot of women artists were, and particularly African American women artists. But she used collage. Her paintings were incredible. She used fabric and infused them into the painting. She really showed a way of coming to terms with not limiting fine art. I mean, she was a great painter, she made incredible paintings, but she was modern and experimental. And from what I hear, right up until the end when she taught, and she only died 2 or 3 years ago, right up until the end, about 10 years ago, while she was still teaching, she was very adamant to her students to be free of the constraints of material, to use things in a new and innovative way. And this is totally inspired by her.
Wonderful. Next image. The materiality of fashion is such an important aspect of it. We tend to think of fashion just as an image on a little screen, but in fact, it's a real thing. It's an object made of textile.
Yes, and actually that's why I love doing runway. I did runway for about 7 years, but at some point way before COVID, I just thought I'm going to style everything, have it short, and the editors were amazing. They just make appointments, sometimes in groups pre-COVID, and they all come, look at the close-up on 2 or 3 models changing a lot, and I love the materiality. So this is the latest collection. And this was really a collection that was done during the height of COVID, but it's inspired by 2 great artists. Barclay L. Hendricks, a figurative African-American artist, no longer with us, but whose work is sensational. And Edouard Villa, another artist whose work is sensational, a member of the Nabis movement. But then, in a way, what I thought was incredible with both their work is this attention to detail, both of the subject, the textiles around them, the textiles they were wearing, and the textiles on the furniture and objects in the room. And I love the fact that these 2 artists, different cultures, different eras, somehow managed to infuse this element of the subject jumping out of the frame of the picture, even though they're completely submerged in all this pattern. So this collection, which is the latest one, is all about the play of pattern. There's knitwear, the coats and the scarves and knitwear mixed with rich brocades. Yeah, but always there's that 70s element with the shoes or the length of the skirt. Because, I'm a child of the 70s.
That's your youth. You go back to it.
Yep.
Let's look at the next one. We've got this one in our upcoming collection, Ravishing, the Rose in Fashion.
Yes, I'm thankful.
Years of rose imagery.
I'm thrilled to be in that show. And the photograph on the left was an American Vogue editorial, which was fantastic. Starred by Gabriella Jones. And it features that dress from the Françoise Gilles collection, Spad collection. And, I love the way it was shot because a lot of the time, no disrespect, I think if you're going to delve into something, you need to know how to do it. And it's not that difficult to look. Found information, properly found, not research, is not subjective. And I felt that the stylist, really imbued with the head tie this element of the fabulous head ties people in Nigeria tie to go to occasions or just to wear in general. So I love that picture. And the right is, I think, the April issue of American British Vogue, I beg your pardon, Edward Enninful's British Vogue, in which he featured a dress from my Emma Amos collection, a square neck cloquet dress on the cover, my first British Vogue cover, and one that I just love the way, apart from Edward Enninful's vision and the whole magazine's vision, that's the words on the front, the captions, find your joy, find your own joy with color, texture, and print, and live, even in these tough times, because it's not about showing off, it's about sharing, as it were.
Yes, the whole desire for beauty and specialness. That's a lovely cover.
Yeah, amazing. I hold that cover very dear, and I'm very thrilled. Yeah.
Let's go to the next one.
That's just my studio. Move
That's
on.
your studio. Very nice. And is this from your Instagram?
No. This is just
This is just a shot of your studio. Excellent.
work, and I always have like the Stanley Whitney painting, early 20th century Burkina Faso mask. There, my sketches, and I have postcards and some fabric. It's just always a mix. Tommaso Corby, Mora, ceramic. I love surrounding myself with things. My philosophy is without making things heavy, more is more. I love that element. And if you look in the far back, just next to the statue, that's the Pointer Sisters album from the 70s that inspired that collection.
Your collections are amazing.
Okay.
Next image.
Now, this is the boutique in Mason's Yard, which, I feel that part of the experience of walking into a boutique or a space is to leave with something else apart from things you may or may not buy. And so I feel the boutique, I just move things around constantly with art, with objects. There's no hierarchy. The fabrics on the walls are things that I grew up with in my bedroom as a child, which were made. My mother used to buy these fabrics from a Nigerian creative workshop, and she used to do the whole bedroom in them. And I have a huge collection of what is left, and I just use them. I just want people to feel comfortable and for their eyes to wander. And particularly when someone comes with their partner or their friend, they need to look at other things. So
it's a wonderful thing sharing your collection in the boutique. The boutique becomes almost like a kind of art gallery that you can appreciate visually as you wander through it.
Exactly, with no pressure. There are no labels. So usually you ask, oh, what's this? What's this carving? What's this book? I love books. Like, I'm a bit of a book fiend. But yeah, I want people to leave with an idea of where it's all coming from, regardless of season.
I know we only have about 5 more minutes before we open it to questions. So let's look through. I want to see some more of your Instagram. I'm one of your avid followers on Instagram. Can you just say, how did you start Instagram? What do you aim to do with your Instagram feed? It's so fabulous.
Well, I don't know how to do anything else. And one day my wife said to me, you should do Instagram. And I said, are you kidding? I had a flip phone up until a few years ago. And I started, and people would just follow, and I just wake up in the morning and think of something that I love, and I put it up. Or during the day, I think, oh, maybe I should put this, but it's never thought through, and it's not really about what I do. It's about things I admire and respect. And if we keep moving on, we'll
yes, let's keep moving. That's right. You see more.
Issues on the
So eclectic and wonderful.
Horace O'Day, Emma Amos painting on the far right, picture I took in the car in Lagos a few years ago from the back of a car.
Keep going.
It's really just mix and match. Now, this is more about curatorial.
Now, you've been started curating too. I mean, in a way, you've curated your collections, your Instagram, your boutique, but now you've become a real curator. And so, can you tell us a little bit about your practice of being a curator of contemporary art?
Yeah, I mean, this was at Salon 94 Garden in 2014 when Julie Greenberg asked me to curate a show, which turned out to be, I thought it was sort of like just like an extension of my boutique without my clothes. But if we move on to the next.
Next one.
Then in 2016, Jenny Lomax of the Camden Art Centre, this amazing museum in London, asked me to curate a show, offered me the whole museum, whatever show I wanted. So this was my first contemporary art institutional curatorial project, which I loved doing. And it was a huge show. It was the whole museum and the outer garden. There's Linetti Adongo Ache, but next to Alice Neal, Chris O'Cree, N.D. Wiley drawings, Hervin Anderson, there's just a Hassan Hajjaj, there's a real mixture of Claude Cahun was in this show, if we move to the next.
Go to the next one.
And this was the book that we did based on that. And my last big institutional show was this in Chicago, the Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago, when I was offered a show by Madeline Greenstein again to sort of do what I like. So I decided Chicago is a wonderful city, and I felt they didn't really know what they had. So I used most collection I took from the MCA collection, but then I asked all these other institutions, Inuit, Art Institute of Chicago, Terra Foundation, and private collections in home to lend, and they all did. So just to hold up a mirror at Chicago and say, look at what you have in your own city. And if we go to the next image, that was the final room. On the opposite side were mannequins. I only put my clothes in one room of mannequins on the opposite side. 30 mannequins, all dressed in different collections, looking at that wall.
Fabulous show. Let's go one more. I think we've got one more, a couple more.
Yeah, that's another room with just a variety of artists that, Rauschenberg, Sheila Hicks, Madeline Odundo, Simone Lee, mixed with Stanley Whitney, Roscoe, Yanis Koulenet. I mean, you see what you have, Ed Clark on the far end, you see Laura Owens, and you think, this is the ultimate. I need to pay these artists respect, hang them together, but in a way where they will feel they're amongst their peers, old and new. So there were a lot of young artists in the show from Chicago that I also sought out. It was a really wonderful experience. And if we go to this image, that is the book that came out of the show, edited by Naomi Beckwith, a wonderful curator who's now Chief Curator of the Guggenheim. And it was a joy to work on that book with the designers were amazing. And, it was just a great experience and sort of old school, but with a new modern vision. And the book has a very different format. But for me, this involves my fashion practice and vice versa. And, art for me is a record of the times as much as fashion. And art says something politically, socially, economically, sexually about what was going on in a particular era. And I hope that, my collections of clothing do so as well, and that my curatorial efforts sort of inform and extend that, but in the contemporary art world. And of course, I love artists. So.
Let's shoot it just so it's pictures of us. I'm going to start with some questions, but before the very first question, I have one last question, which is, I see you as such an incredibly cosmopolitan person, which is so rare today in a world of narrowly defined and policed identities. Can you talk about this idea of cosmopolitanism? Do you see yourself as a cosmopolitan person?
Yeah, I see myself as it's funny, my dearly departed great curator, Okwenweze, who was just a great, apart from being this iconic but incredibly visionary curator and museum director. We were both Nigerian in these fields where, quite frankly, nobody expected us to know about certain things, even though we had a certain exposure and education. And believe me, even in Nigeria, you're learning a lot more about other cultures than people imagine. And I do see myself as cosmopolitan because I think cosmopolitan is fearless. It is not being afraid to actually not appropriate, but learn about what the experience of something else might be like. And be very careful about just dipping into it and dipping out. You know, it's not a trend. It's also an open eye that is so fulfilling and really inspires one. And it is respect for different communities, different artistic, aesthetic visions and practices from all over the world. Like I don't believe in outsider artists. An artist. What is that? The art you create after you study is very different from the art you create while you study. And in this way, cosmopolitanism to me is having an international point of view while knowing who you are and where you're from. Because I don't believe you know where you can go anywhere unless you know where you're from. That's in a way. But I think cosmopolitanism is not a trend. It's a way of being and a way of seeing.
Yeah. One of the questions that someone just sent was about this way of seeing. The person writes, can you comment on how photography is used to image your creations?
If they're talking about how they're shot, yes?
Well, he continues and says, the clothes and their wearers are three-dimensional, but photographs, of course, are two-dimensional. How do you want to use photographs to show your creations? So what thoughts go into that?
Okay. I think photographs have a certain longevity that other mediums don't have. And I think photographs are the most familiar records now. And everyone has or has owned or finds or is given a photograph from the past, from the recent past, from the far past. And I feel that they capture a certain magic of a moment that you can look at when you're feeling a bit down or when you need inspiration or when you just need to know that it's all worthwhile. And as much as I'm very grateful for my success, I love to feel that, when people write or I meet people and they say, I still have that photograph in my kitchen or in my study, or, this is somebody who has nothing to do with fashion. I feel very thrilled. And Luis Montero, who I work with, we work very closely on our style and conceptualize. And, photographs are a tangible form of a diary of something.
Yeah. Another attendee writes, your wife is exceptionally glamorous and an expert in art. She wears your clothes, but did she inspire your interest in curating?
Well, it's really interesting. A lot of people ask that. A lot of people would say to me, you should curate. And I never took it seriously, but someone never really know what's in a show. I respect the Studio and Museum in Harlem, which I love, and of course, her work and her genius as a curator pre and since, and during her current term at the Studio Museum. And the Studio Museum actually inspired me with the level of aesthetic intelligence and visual sharpness of their shows, but that was institutional. And I think that what inspired me to curate, even though I don't come from an institutional background, was the fact that I had the freedom, independence-wise, to do what I liked because I own my business 100%. So I think Thelma doesn't even know what's ever going into a show. She always sees it the first time when it goes, which I think is a great thing that way.
Someone else asks, do you design your own fabric patterns or do you shop fabrics that are already printed? And then asking, where do you print your fabrics? How do you meet minimums?
Well, it's funny. I design at least 4 prints a season myself. And then once in a while, it's particularly for beautiful walls. And if you see the collection, sometimes I transpose my prints, my own design prints, onto the knitwear in Jakarta. And then for a special piece, I might have 20 meters of the most incredible fabric. I mean, I have to say, I have a stack of fabric to that. And I don't like to cut it often, but I will for a special piece. And maybe we can only supply 8 pieces worldwide of that piece, I print both in England, I have a great print firm that I've worked with, small, I think they're 10 in the whole country. I've worked with for almost 15 years. And I also do a lot of printing in Como, which was historically the place, but it now suffered from a lot of the economic situation and now COVID. So Como is always a good place because now in Italy and even in England, minimums are not a problem for young designers. It's important to know. And you don't have to print 100 meters of fabric. You can even print sample lengths. I also just, for the walls, I go to the places where I feel I can find it. But I tell you, at the bottom of every incredible, now run-down store in New York, Paris, Beirut, Athens, where I am now, whenever I say, can I go downstairs to the basement? No, you would be shocked because there were always people that took care and dressed well for decades. You would be shocked what you find. But the majority of my fabrics, say 70% in season, I design.
I've got a long but interesting question here. The person writes, I'm interested in how St. Louis, Senegal, Saint Louis, served as one source of inspiration for one of your earlier collections. When one thinks of that city and fashion, I think the main image that comes to mind is the signore, women who were balanced between European and West African cultures due to their marriages to European men. Is that part of what inspires you about Saint Louis? Your work seems to blend influences seamlessly to create wholly new forms. Do you think the signores did that as well?
Absolutely, absolutely. And the women of Senegal, past and present, are very stylish. And they have this poise. The thing with Saint Louis as well is I always love Senegalese photography from the 20s to the 60s. And Omuli, who was this great photographer, I always had his work around. And some of the greatest studio portrait photographers from Senegal have come from Saint Louis. It is this island that defies definition. It also used to be the capital city of Senegal, 400 years ago. But it is this seamless, people are proud, and it's a Muslim society, so people are very modest. But at the same time, the women are very aware of who they are and how they glide and how they present themselves. So do the women you described, the question, the bearer of the question, in a way that is almost like watching a 20s. It's almost like watching Les Enfants du Paradis or some other West African film from the 40s or 50s. It's really cinematic and wild. And these women, they walk at dusk to pick up something in the market or in the fish, but they're dressed in the filigree gold jewelry, the wrap around the heads, the head wrap or the hair all done. It's a very cinematic experience. And for that reason, the women and the men, they're terribly elegant. And the island is mysterious. It gives you a lot, but not everything. So I love that mystery.
Someone else is asking us if you to talk more about how music influences your work and whether, for example, you listen to specific kinds of music while you are working.
I do. I mean, music is fun. I used to have 2,000 records when I was 17. That's all I spent money on. No. Fela Kuti. But, I grew up with Jimi Hendrix, Fela Kuti, multiple religious. But also, I loved, Bob Marley, reggae, of course, the Mighty Diamonds. I love opera. I wasn't a huge fan of opera until much later. I love hip hop, but my hip hop is very late 70s from Curtis Blow to late 80s, early 90s, and Ian McKean, also. But I love modern hip hop. Music I listen to all the time, and I only discovered how to use Spotify, I think, a year ago. Which I mean, now it's like the greatest thing that ever happened. So I keep doing this playlist, which is a joy because you really can find a Steely Dan and have it next to Old Labelle or Pointer Sisters and have it next to Sonny Ade without having to change, So no, music is very, as you see from the collections, because musicians are artists. Great musicians, composers, and performers are artists. And they fill our lives with a form of art that is a sound base. So yes, very inspiring.
Someone else writes and says, I love the designs you've created for the musician Corinne Bailey Rae. How often do you design for specific people?
I have to say, I'm not really a celebrity. Like I hardly ever discuss who might wear something of mine. And these are people that approached me just as normal people to buy things. And of course, again, I grew up with that old school thing of, well, if I respect what you do, even if you've bought this time, they say, oh, would you consider making something for this tour or whatever? And we do it very discreetly, but it's a real consultation and a real creative collaboration. And what really I find really amazing, and I'm so grateful for it, it's never far from what I already do. You know, they want that. So it's a really, in this sort of celebrity obsessed world of free things, artists and singers and like Corinne or Tandy or whoever, it's not about a name. If I respect what you do and how you conduct yourself and your appreciation of something I do, it's a great honor. But I keep it very quiet.
Another person asks, what are you doing in Greece?
Well, I'm very lucky. I make art. I'm just very quiet about it. And I've been commissioned by the Neon Foundation to contribute to a fantastic group show with 29 artists created by Elena Kunturi, the director, and Madeline Greenstein in this incredible converted tobacco factory. And so I've come to install, I was given a whole building which used to be the old customs house. So I've come to install my first trip in a year and a half because I'm vaccinated. And I finished 2 hours ago. So the show opens next week. It's incredible. It's the Dimitri Daskalopoulos Foundation, and really just the other artists, and to be included and asked to again do what I want is another plus that I don't take for granted. So that's why I'm in Athens.
Congratulations. That's terrific. We're running out of time, but let's ask a couple more questions. Someone asks, can you talk more about how film has influenced your work and what filmmakers in particular, or which films in particular, have been important to you?
Of course, John Cassavetes, incredible, Under the Influence, Gloria, but also Osman Sembene, That Girl, Shisako, the film that just completely overwhelmed me over the last 10 years. Chicago's film, Waiting for Happiness, which coincidentally I've just done a collaboration which comes out early next month of menswear. I'm going to do a collaboration with a young brand in London, tailoring brand called Speciale, and it's all influenced, most of it, by this film called Waiting for Happiness. So I'm always, after filmmakers, I also grew up with this culture where in the 70s there were these films shown in the context of quality film, Haramboko, I just saw again. There are all these movies, but Antonioni, Cassavetes, I'm a huge fan of them. And it's a bit, my real dream would be maybe to do something I'd love to do is to collaborate on costumes for a movie, because I'm a huge fan of film and the power of clothing and costumes in the film.
That would be very interesting to do some film costume. That would be very interesting.
Film and dance are very special.
Now, someone else is asking, noticing the hats that you showed in some of your collections and wondering if you had designed those and if you were interested in accessories.
Oh, accessories are a big part. Some I designed, some of them are vintage pieces that I find from the 30s, 40s, or whatever, because millinery is an incredible skill. Incredible. And FIT has this incredible collection. If I ever go to a museum that has costume, I always seek out, the millinery. And even nowadays, when you see a young woman, 18, 20, 24, just walk by in a hat that is old or new, she really grabs your attention. And there's a certain sort of determination, but also a certain positioning that it gives you. So I do love, and obviously I grew up again looking at Stephen Burrows, Madame V, Saint Laurent, Carousel, Leonet, and all these other great designers, and the accessoires were very important. They worked with great jewelry makers, from Poir for the jewelry to Shemama, and they worked with the best hat makers. Givenchy, Hubert de Givenchy's hat maker is the best. So even though I just bring them in once in a while, they're very important elements, again, of my heritage, because they take the place of the head wrap.
When you come and see Ravishing the Rose to see your beautiful dress, you'll see we have a rose garden full of dozens of hats with roses on them.
And the Americans were amazing.
Some are American, some are French, some are Italian. We're very proud to have your work in the collection of the museum at FIT. Really, really proud. It's very important. And I know RISD, Rhode Island School of Design, is so pleased to have your work.
Thank you.
I remember you gave one of your grandfather's robes to the Metropolitan, right?
I gave one of his, because he was a king and he ruled for 50 years. And at some point, he left all these things to my father. And one day, my parents, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, said, we think you'd like to keep this because they knew. And it's one of his own robes, incredibly embroidered, with the matching velvet slippers with the crown embroidered on them. And they were in a box for a while, and I thought people should see it. So I love the Met's collection. It's an incredible collection. There are many American museums with a great collection. But I'm a huge fan of Alicia Lagama, who runs that whole area for Africa, Oceania. And yeah, I gave it to them. So I get, free membership for a while.
Very good. Well, one last question here. So how would you define your style? By which I mean, I guess, yours personally and yours as a designer, or maybe just your aesthetic vision, whichever way you want to take it.
Yeah, I'll start with personal style. I mean, my teenagers and even up till now, I don't shop for clothes all the time, but when I see something I like, I buy it more than once because things don't tend to stick around. And I love mixing my tailored suits or specialist suits or from different great tailors in London. But I still have some of my old Yohji Yamamoto from the 90s, and I mix it with Grace Rose Bonner, I mix it with Bianca Saunders, with Bloke, a Nigerian designer, and then they said Bode right now, Emily Bode, I'm a big fan. But I like to look as if, I'm 56 years old. I can't walk around looking like Martin dressed as me. Martin dressed as lamb, but I like to look interesting. And those clothes are out there. They're young designers, Maximilian, Aluana. I mean, if you look, you can find really well-made clothes, particularly in London, which used to have the reputation for clothes looking good but not well-made. And I mix it with tailored things. I love beautifully made. As far as my work is concerned, I think it's more about what am I trying to do with the clothes. And I really feel that it is a kind of cosmopolitan international chic that is imbued with various elements, but kept in that relate to me and are recognizable because of how I juxtapose print and pattern. But it's also about alluring clothes for women who and ageless, who you remember when they leave the room.
Yeah.
That's as best as I can put it.
Thank you so much, Duro. Thank you.
My pleasure.
I'm afraid we're out of time, but I want to tell the audience, can you please join the Center for its next online Artist in Conversation program, which will take place on Wednesday, June 16th, with the artist Njideka Akunyili Crosby in conversation with Courtney J. Martin, who's director of the Yale Center for British Art. So thank you, Duro. I hope I see you when you come back from Greece to New York.
I will, and thank you to everyone for tuning in. I'm very honored. Thanks to you.
Thank you so much.
Take care.